Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be diving into the Yncarne and explaining why the Yncarne wins games. Now, as you guys know, the Yncarne is one of the most expensive models in the index. It's also one of the hardest to use in actual gameplay, especially since its recent nerf that it can only teleport once during your own turn, whereas before it could teleport any number of times in your turn and your opponent's, turning it into one of the most frustrating and, quite frankly, powerful units in the game. However, that era has come to an end, and the Yncarne, for its 350 point price tag, has become quite hard to actually use in most games, and nowadays you only see a couple of people even using it in competitive play. However, I still think the Yncarne is a very powerful piece. You just need to set up the right situations for it to truly shine. And of course, setting up those situations can be a little bit difficult, but hopefully I can walk you guys through some of the things you should look out for and follow through on. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of the Yncarne. Just a quick review of the model. We're going to be looking at its strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies, how to position the Yncarne on the battlefield, and when to pull the quote-unquote trigger on your teleport. And lastly, how to use the Yncarne in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of it. So looking at the stat line of the Yncarne, it is fairly tough with toughness 10, a 2+ save, and a 4+ invul. It does have 12 wounds, and it is quite a bit less durable than the Avatar of Cain is. Toughness 10 versus toughness 12 and 12 wounds versus 14 of the Avatar of Cain make it a fair bit squishier, especially against mortal wound bombs. It does, however, have a decent speed of 10, which can help it move around the battlefield fairly quickly, especially with the ability to teleport. As for its melee weapons, it has a pretty good sweep, being able to take out large amounts of light infantry. One wound targets seem to be the best for its sweep attack. And its strike is pretty good against most other things. Being strength 12 means that you're going to be able to, kind of strike pretty hard against most tough targets inside of, toughness 12. However, it does have a little bit less damage than the Avatar of Cain, being only strength 12 and d6 plus 1 damage instead of d6 plus 2. So that is something you should consider when choosing the targets that the Yncarne is going to go after. Typically speaking, anything toughness 12 or higher is going to give the Yncarne a bit of trouble without some assistance via fate dice or other dice manipulation. Typically, the Yncarne can still kill a wide array of enemy vehicles and monsters, just not the toughest units in the game, unlike the Avatar, which can definitely tackle some of the hardest hitting and toughest units that the game has to offer. As far as its ranged weapon goes, it has a very powerful torrent weapon with ignores cover. It also has strength 7 AP -1 and D3 damage, so decent at taking out light to medium targets, and a really good candidate for Overwatch, being a torrent weapon that has a lot of attacks. D6 plus 3 is nothing to laugh at. This is of course combined with the Yncarne's ability to teleport. So once per turn, you can teleport to a destroyed unit, and this can be an allied or enemy unit, which can indeed set you up for some insane plays. The Yncarne can also, of course, have all damage. Now, this is quite a bit weaker than it used to be. Melta weapons can get around this quite effectively. Mortal wound damage can get around it quite effectively. And as we know, the grenade strat, tank shock, things like that are all things that the Yncarne is very weak to, so you do have to make sure that you look out for those things. As far as its points cost, it's one of the most expensive single models in the entire index at 350. Now, personally, I don't think it should be that expensive considering it got its ability nerfed and cut down to size, but it's still a very powerful piece, no doubt, and we're probably not going to see a points decrease anytime soon. As far as its keywords go, it has the fly keyword, making it a little bit easier to maneuver being a monster. It's a little bit faster than the Avatar of Cain because it can move over enemy models. But it also has the Psyker keyword in addition to the common ones that we expect, like a character and monster, making it a little bit weaker to those anti-effects. As for the Yncarne's strengths and weaknesses, its strengths are that it's reasonably tough with that half damage, 2+ save, 4+ invul, and of course toughness 10, which is not that bad. It has great high AP damage with that AP -4 on its melee weapons, and its ability can open up some insane threat vectors. However, its weaknesses are that it is very vulnerable to mortal wounds, even more so than the Avatar of Khaine, and we know the Avatar of Khaine is very vulnerable to those, and it also struggles killing anything with toughness 12 or above. So anything Land Raider level and above is going to be a bit of a struggle for the Yncarne. So, no monoliths, no Rogaldorn battle tanks, no super heavy Bane blades, things like that. The Yncarne really can't deal with those targets, while as the Avatar of Khaine can. As far as the combos and synergies that the Yncarne has, of course, Fortune gives it a great durability boost. This is arguably even better than on the Avatar of Khaine because you do really want the Yncarne to survive. However, it won't protect against mortal wounds, of course. D-cannons can destroy targets out of line of sight to proc its ability so that you can then teleport to said unit. And of course, the D-cannons are probably the most efficient way to get the Yncarne where it needs to go. Fire and Fade is also very situationally insane after using its ability as well. So if you're able to proc its ability, teleport, then of course you can always Fire and Fade the Yncarne to another location, and this can put your opponent into a real fix. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over the basics of the Yncarne, the stats, the combos, the strengths and weaknesses, how do you position the Yncarne on the battlefield, and when do you pull the quote-unquote trigger on its ability? Now, without a doubt, this is the hardest part about playing the Yncarne, knowing when to pull the trigger on its ability and when to position the Yncarne properly to cause maximum disruption. And I have to say, games have been won or lost based on where the Yncarne is moving, and of course, if the Yncarne is positioned well or not. So, my advice to positioning the Yncarne on the battlefield and when to pull that proverbial trigger on its ability is to play conservatively in the first round or two. Don't go in too early. And this is because your opponent is probably going to have most of their forces available to kill the Yncarne within the first 2 turns of the game. And I know that means playing with 350 points less on the battlefield than you could have been playing with. But 9 times out of 10, if you wait, play safe, play conservatively with the Yncarne in the first couple rounds, it will lead to a much bigger payoff later where the Yncarne will easily be able to clean up 300, 400, sometimes even 500 plus points worth of enemy models. And really the best time to pull the trigger is around turn 3 when your opponent is starting to spread out their units, trying to get to objectives, trying to play the secondary game and stuff like that. And you notice that your opponent's army is kind of adapting to the missions, secondary missions that they're drawing. And at this point, what you want to do is look for quote-unquote slingshot opportunities that can propel the Yncarne into enemy units and to safety as well. So a unit is out in the open on an objective, maybe 8 inches away from that unit, there is another unit staging for an attack against anything that wants to, retake that objective. What you're going to do is when you destroy that enemy unit on the objective, you're going to place your Yncarne there at the very edge of that enemy unit as close to the other enemy unit that is staging currently, and then you're going to use the Yncarne to go after that said staging unit. And don't worry guys, I do have a diagram showing just how to do that. But alternatively, you also want to look for vectors of attack that provide maximum disruption. So if your opponent does leave their backfield a little bit more open, you can bring in warp spiders, you can bring in swooping hawks, maybe destroy an enemy unit in the backfield, and then have your Yncarne come in and just wreak havoc on their home objective. And this can be a fantastic way of getting rid of those indirect fire platforms, something like Exorcist battle tanks from the Sisters of Battle, Imperial Guard basilisks or manticores, those units that you typically don't want around for the entire length of the game. And of course, I probably don't need to say this, but despite the indirect nerfs, indirect fire is still very strong in Warhammer 40k. Not every faction is playing into it, but the factions that have strong indirect fire are consistently using it in competitive play. And the Yncarne is perhaps one of the best answers to this problem. So you do want to be able to look for those opportunities as well. Okay, so for today's examples, we are going to use terrain layout number 2. Of course, we're going to use Dawn of War deployment. Like the previous videos, I am going to shift up the deployment in future videos, but for now, we're going to use this one right here. And this layout is pretty open in the center. It has pretty good firing lanes on the left-hand side, the middle, and the right-hand side of the table. But there are pockets where, your units are relatively well protected, right? Like if you look at the right-hand side with the L-shaped ruins or the left-hand side of our own deployment zone, there's a good pocket of protection right there that is going to be able to protect multiple units, especially those ready to stage to attack objectives. So, in our first example, I want to show you guys what it looks like to use the Yncarne to leapfrog off of a unit that you just destroyed on an objective or somewhere else on the battlefield and be able to attack a staging unit that would normally be out of line of sight and out of your current threat range. So, like I said before, the right-hand side of your opponent's battlefield, so our right, is going to be a great place for your opponent to stage for objective play, right? A lot of fast-moving assault units or even heavier units can sit behind that ruin right there and be safe from ranged attacks. And there's really no vector in which you could get line of sight to them unless you're right up on them. Your opponent might have something to overwatch you in that little pocket there. So we're going to take a different route with this. We're going to use the Wind Riders, or whatever unit you have, to destroy a unit on that objective. Because your opponent is, most likely going to have to be pressuring objectives. The Eldar don't like to just put units on objectives for no reason, so our opponents are usually the ones that have to do that. In response, of course, our Wind Riders are going to come up and they're going to obliterate that unit on the objective. Now, if it is a tougher unit, something like Deathwing Knights, or perhaps even, Death Company, then we may need to bring in additional units. Fire Dragons, D-Cannons, and to a lesser extent, Wind Riders with Shroud Runner support are pretty decent tools against Deathwing Knights. At least when you're ganging up on them like that. So, after they're destroyed, your Yncarne can hop in on the back edge of the unit, because remember, the Yncarne can actually appear anywhere in the space that the destroyed unit was in, so that means the rearmost model there. You can replace that rearmost model, and you can be right there next to the enemy unit that is essentially staging for you to take that objective. At this point, the Yncarne can of course charge in and destroy said unit and also be in a position to where the rest of their army can't really shoot it. They may have some other stuff behind that L-shaped ruin right there, but chances are it's not going to be enough to kill a Yncarne. And at this point, it's where the Yncarne really goes wild. Because the next turn, you can teleport somewhere else. Your opponent really doesn't have that many tools to deal with it in that quadrant. And if your opponent does have a bunch of tools in that area of the board, then of course they have to waste all their resources killing the Yncarne that turn. And that means you get the run of the board for at least one more round. Okay, but what if you really need to get into the opponent's backfield to destroy a key unit and make sure that your opponent's game plan doesn't go quite as expected? So in this case, we have decided as the Eldar player to take the left-hand side of the battlefield, and our opponent has decided to mostly spread out and capture the middle objective and the objective on the right-hand side, so our right-hand side. And for the most part, your opponent is content to just kind of wait and see what we're going to do and place themselves on two objectives in the middle and make sure that the rear objective, their home objective, is secured. They have plenty of strong staging units that are ready to go ahead and sweep in and kill whatever units we put on those objectives. So what we need to do in this scenario is we need to be able to find a way to get behind enemy forces so that we can divert some of their attention. Because let's be real, if we're fighting something like Dark Angels and they were arrayed against us like this, we're not going to be taking those primary objectives. It's going to be very difficult to do. Especially when you consider that Redeemer in the center of the battlefield is probably going to overwatch anything that comes near it. So we're definitely not taking those objectives right away. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to sneak around with our Warp Spiders on turn 1. By the way, Dark Angel armies They might have a couple of squads of, intercessors or eradicators, but they're not going to have anything super strong that's going to be able to defend their backfield at the same time as they're going to be able to take the middle objectives. Their army is just not that big, right? Those Deathwing Knights are extremely expensive, and a lot of their vehicles are also very expensive as well. So in this case, our opponent might have a Gladiator Lancer in the backfield ready to come out and pounce on any of our armor, or a Repulsor Executioner, something that can take out our Falcons, just waiting in the wings for us to come out. Now, we already know that we can't really take the middle without losing a bunch of our models. We also know that if our Falcons come out to play and we whiff against the Redemptor and the Deathwing Knights and stuff like that, that's basically game, because those Lancers or, other things, they might have other units in the backfield, right? But whatever it is, it's probably going to be strong enough to be able to kill a Falcon. And then once all of our tools that can effectively deal with the Deathwing Knights are destroyed, the Dark Angels player is going to run all over us. So we need to find a way to cut out their support. And of course, here comes the Yncarne. So what we're going to do is we are going to use our triple D cannon in the back of the field, or perhaps we have a unit of Wind Riders that can go around the flank. Whatever the case may be, we're going to go ahead and destroy that unit of, intercessors or whatever that is, staging behind that ruin there on the right-hand side of the battlefield in the center. Basically the unit with the X over it if you can't see it. We're going to destroy that unit, then we're going to use the Yncarne to assault the Lancer in the backfield. Now, on this particular board, it's pretty easy because that ruin right there is not going to be able to stop the Yncarne from coming in. And, with a 6 fate dice perhaps for a charge roll, we're going to be able to come right in and destroy that vehicle. At the same time, our Warp Spiders can jump forward onto the objective to make sure that we control it. And now our opponent can't really do anything, right? Our opponent can bring in something like Inceptors or some sort of objective unit, but we can always overwatch with either the Yncarne or the Warp Spiders, which will make it much harder for them to wrest control of that objective from us. And at this point, your opponent's probably not going to be able to do much about it, right? They have another Lancer back there, but one single Lancer or, a single Repulsor Executioner is not going to be able to kill the Yncarne. They may be lucky to kill some Warp Spiders, but that's about it. They're going to have to either backtrack with a unit of Deathwing Knights, so see that unit on the left side stage to capture that left-hand side objective. They're going to have to use that unit to come back and try to wrest that objective away from us, at which point we can hop on that left side objective and lock it down. And of course, once the Deathwing Knights start coming back and they commit to defending their own backline, we can of course just warp out with the Warp Spiders, jump back out, make sure that we get out of there safely, and your opponent's just going to probably be left holding the bag. If they can even kill the Yncarne, which is doubtful, because, as good as Deathwing Knights are with their anti-monster and so forth, they're only doing about 1 damage per failed invul save because of that half damage ability. Now, on top of this, if your opponent does get back onto that objective, the chances are that the Yncarne is going to kill enough models in return to where your opponent just can't out-OC you on the objective. The Yncarne has OC 3. Warp Spiders, of course, have OC 1 per Warp Spider. And, the Yncarne is going to kill some models back. Might not kill all of them, but I would say it's pretty realistic to expect that you're going to kill 2 Deathwing Knights in return. Because the chances of you forcing 5 invul saves on your opponent are extremely high. So either 2 of them die and you tie on the objective with the Yncarne, or 3 of them die and you win the objective, right? So yeah, this is going to be hard for your opponent to deal with no matter how you look at it. And truthfully speaking, it's something your opponent may not come back from. And of course, all the while, the rest of your army can kind of do their thing, right? The Fire Dragons can now pretty much lock down that left-hand side of the board. Your D cannons can continue to fire on that Land Raider, kill it, and make sure that maybe later in the game you can take the center objective away from your opponent. And of course, your Guardians can kind of screen the backfield and make sure that no units are going to pop in and kill your D cannons off. Now, do expect that at this point, your opponent's probably going to do everything they can to kill the Yncarne, and the Yncarne might die. But the good news with this is that even though the Yncarne dies, you've disrupted your opponent so much that the Yncarne is more than made up its points value. And, in that unit that it killed, the Gladiator Lancer or the Repulsor Eradicator or whatever, it's probably made up enough of its points, along with the fact that you disrupted a significant part of your opponent's army. The Yncarne more than made up for his points value. So how do you use the Yncarne in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of it? Well, the Yncarne, first and foremost, is an opportunist and disruption piece that excels at taking advantage of holes in your opponent's defenses. And of course, it has a plethora of options to be able to do this with, and of course, the way you build your army around the Yncarne is also going to be a big influence as to how well the Yncarne is able to execute this plan. I did mention D-cannons earlier, but another honorable mention I want to go ahead and talk about is the Crimson Hunter. Now, it has been a little bit forgotten, but the Crimson Hunter is still a very good piece for allowing the Yncarne to teleport to enemy units because as a flyer, it ignores line of sight. The only thing it really has to worry about is units hiding in the bottom story of ruins. But essentially, if the Crimson Hunter can see it, then it can shoot it, which is awesome. Also, when playing the Yncarne, it is key to wait for an opportunity where your opponent cannot easily retaliate and also cannot afford to ignore it. So when you do teleport in with the Yncarne, make sure it's not going to just immediately die in your opponent's turn. You want to make your opponent sweat. You want to make your opponent, kind of divert forces in order to deal with the Yncarne and thus, ruin their secondary plans and ruin their primary plans at the same time. If your Yncarne still dies while achieving that level of disruption, that is what I would consider a good trade. You're not trading for, point for point. Your Yncarne is much more expensive than whatever you killed, but you're diverting, 300, 400, maybe even 500 points worth of enemy units away from their objectives and, your opponent's main battle plan. And that, my friends, is a hell of a trade. In conclusion, the Yncarne is an extremely powerful unit in the right circumstances, but it is difficult to master. Patience, as with many Eldar units, is the key to the Yncarne's ultimate success, and also, how you generally build your army around the Yncarne is going to contribute to its success to a fair degree, right? Maybe it's not the whole equation here, but, having something like D-cannons, having something like a Crimson Hunter that can, kind of ignore line of sight is an important factor to consider when building a army with the Yncarne. Or, if not those indirect fire units, then at least units that are very fast and hard-hitting. Wind Riders and Fire Dragons are both very good at this, being, pretty powerful range units. And there are a couple of other units that can kind of combine together to do the same thing. Shadow Specters, Dark Reapers, and so forth. But that needs to be planned in advance. So you do need to make sure you move your units ahead of time so that they are in a position to kind of flank your opponent, kill a key unit, and then teleport your Yncarne to that dead unit. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last 2 years. It's almost there, guys, just a couple more weeks, and we will be officially at the 2-year mark. So if you're not subbed to the channel, would be really cool if we made 5K subscribers. Being here for 2 years, making 5K, I think would be awesome. So, if you haven't subbed yet, definitely, sub, like the video if you liked it, and, all that good stuff. And if you do want to support the channel further, I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, or you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave those links in the description also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.